The morning sunlight filtered through the warehouse's grimy windows, bathing the room in a muted golden glow. Argoz stretched, her human form feeling strangely natural yet unnerving. The gem's magic had softened her goblin features, her sharp, pointed ears now rounded, her emerald green skin replaced by a pale human complexion. Even her spiky black hair seemed less wild, though it still held a hint of her untamed nature. "You ready?" Caleb's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood by the door, his usual no-nonsense demeanour softened by the faintest hint of a grin. "For what?" Argoz asked, pulling on a borrowed jacket that hung loosely on her slight frame. "To see the world," Caleb replied. "You've been cooped up long enough. Let's get you some real food." Argoz's stomach growled at the thought, and she smirked. "Fine, but if this real food isn't as good as you say, I'm holding you personally responsible." Caleb chuckled, opening the door. "Fair enough." The city bustled with life as they stepped into the sunlight. Cars rumbled past, their engines drowning out the chatter of pedestrians. Argoz's sharp yellow eyes darted around, trying to take in everything at once, the towering buildings, the street vendors shouting over each other, the faint aroma of roasted coffee and baked goods wafting through the air. "It's loud," she muttered, her brow furrowing. "You get used to it," Caleb said, leading her through the crowd. "Come on, I've got a spot in mind." They walked for a few blocks before Caleb stopped in front of a small, unassuming diner. The windows were slightly fogged from the heat inside, and the neon sign above the door flickered faintly. "This is it," Caleb said, pushing the door open. The smell hit her immediately, savoury, greasy, and mouth-watering. Argoz's stomach growled again as she followed Caleb to a booth by the window. The waitress, a woman with a tired smile, handed them menus without a word. "Pick whatever you want," Caleb said, leaning back in the booth. "Trust me, it's all good." Argoz hesitated, scanning the menu. The words were foreign to her, but she pretended to understand, pointing randomly at an item. Caleb smirked but didn't comment, ordering for both of them. When the food arrived, pancakes, eggs, and a plate of crispy bacon, Argoz's eyes widened. She took a cautious bite, then another. Faster this time. Caleb laughed as she devoured her plate. "Told you," he said, sipping his coffee. "Okay," Argoz admitted between bites. "You were right. This is amazing." They left the diner with full stomachs and lightened spirits. Caleb led her through the streets, pointing out landmarks and offering bits of advice about blending in. "Keep your head down," he said as they passed a group of police officers. Humans don't usually notice much, but don't give them a reason to look twice. Argoz nodded, her gaze lingering on the shiny badge one of the officers wore. Her goblin instincts itched to reach out, but she clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus. As they turned down a quieter street, Argoz's steps faltered. A figure stood at the far end of the block, tall and imposing, dressed in dark, intricately woven armor that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes glowed faintly beneath his hood, scanning the crowd with predatory intent. Her heart stopped. Draven's captain. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's him." Caleb followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Shit. Don't look at him. Keep moving." But it was too late. The captain's glowing eyes locked onto hers and a cruel smile spread across his face. He started toward them, his movements calm but deliberate, like a wolf closing in on its prey. "Argoz, listen to me," Caleb said, grabbing her arm. "We need to go. Now." They darted into an alley, the sound of the captain's boots echoing behind them. Argoz's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. "He's following us," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Don't look back," Caleb snapped, pulling her forward. "Just keep running." They weaved through side streets and alleys, dodging pedestrians and skirting around market stalls. Argoz's lungs burned, and her legs felt like they might give out, but the captain was relentless. No matter how many corners they turned, how many crowds they passed, he was always just a few steps behind. "We're not losing him," Argoz cried. "We will," Caleb said through gritted teeth. But I need you to trust me. When I tell you to run, you head straight to the Shadow Realm bar. Don't stop. Don't look back." "What about you?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I'll slow him down," Caleb said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Just do as I say." They burst out of an alley and into a crowded square. Caleb skidded to a stop, his eyes darting around. The captain emerged a moment later, his presence casting a shadow over the bustling crowd. People moved aside instinctively, their faces blank, as if some unseen force compelled them to clear his path. "Go!" Caleb shouted, shoving Argoz toward a side street. Argoz hesitated, fear and guilt warring within her. But the captain's gaze snapped to her, and she knew she had no choice. She turned and ran, her legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. The streets blurred around her as she sprinted toward the Shadow Realm bar. The neon sign came into view, its flickering glow a beacon of hope. The neon sign of the Shadow Realm bar flickered overhead, its glow casting jagged reflections on the rain-slick pavement. Argoz shoved open the door and stumbled inside, her chest heaving, her mind racing. The noise and warmth of the bar hit her like a wall, the murmurs and clinking glasses briefly grounding her spinning thoughts. She glanced over her shoulder. No sign of him. Not yet. Moving toward the counter, Argoz leaned heavily against it, her hands trembling. The gem beneath her jacket pulsed faintly, almost as if sensing her fear. "You look like you've had a day," the bartender said, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Need a drink?" Argoz didn't answer, her sharp yellow eyes scanning the room. A crowd of eclectic patrons filled the bar. Humans, creatures disguised as humans, and those hiding their true forms. The air buzzed with faint magic, thick and heady like incense. At a corner table, Rose sat with a glass of glowing liquid in hand, her dark eyes sharp despite her relaxed posture. Across from her, a man Argoz vaguely recognized, the one from outside the warehouse, leaned back in his chair, his sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of the bar's multicolored lights. Their eyes met. His gaze narrowed slightly, but before Argoz could react, the door burst open behind her. The bar fell silent as the captain stepped inside. His presence was a black hole, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The crowd instinctively parted, their faces blank, as if compelled by some unseen force. Argoz froze, her fingers clutching the counter. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. Rose set her glass down and stood, her movements deliberate and graceful. The glint of the bar's lights caught on the diamond ring she absently twisted on her finger. "Now this," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "is what we call a bold entrance." The captain's gaze snapped to her, his expression cold and unyielding. "Step aside." Rose tilted her head, her smirk widening. "Oh, honey, you must be new here. Let me explain how this works. You don't waltz into my bar and bark orders, especially not at me." The captain didn't reply. Instead, he moved forward, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. The tension in the room thickened, and Argos's heart pounded in her chest. Rose didn't back down. She stepped directly into the captain's path, her hands on her hips, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Big guy, you've got two options. 1, you turn around and walk out before this gets messy. 2..." The captain's hand lashed out, the crack of his slap echoing through the bar. Rose staggered back, her smirk replaced by a fiery glare. The crowd gasped, and the bar erupted into murmurs. The unspoken rule of the Shadow Realm bar, no violence, had been shattered. "You," Rose said, straightening and brushing her hair out of her face, "just made the biggest mistake of your life." At the corner table, the man, Darren, pushed his chair back and stood, his posture loose but his expression sharp. He moved toward the captain, his presence commanding in a quiet, calculated way. "That's enough," Darren said, his voice calm but firm. "You know the rules here. No fighting, No exceptions. The captain sneered, his hand twitching toward the weapon at his side. This doesn't concern you. Darren's eyes narrowed, his tone icy. Oh, it does. See, I like this place, and I don't take kindly to people breaking its rules. Before the captain could respond, the bar's enforcers, 3 towering figures with stone-like skin, emerged from the back. Their massive forms loomed over the captain, their silence more intimidating than any threat. A moment later, Silas appeared, his calm presence silencing the room. He approached the captain with measured steps, his expression unreadable. "You've violated the truce," Silas said, his voice low but resonant. "This bar is a sanctuary. You know what that means." The captain's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, but before he could speak, the enforcers moved. They grabbed his arms, their grip unyielding, and held him in place. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small rune-covered device. He activated it with a soft hum, and a beam of light enveloped the captain. "No!" the captain snarled, struggling against the enforcers. "You can't—" The beam intensified, and with a sudden flash, the captain vanished into a swirling portal. The room fell silent, the tension dissipating like smoke. Argoz stared at the spot where the captain had stood, her breath shallow and her hands trembling. The gem beneath her jacket pulsed faintly, its energy reacting to her fear. Rose stepped forward, her smirk sharper now, despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. She tilted her head, her dark eyes fixed on Argoz, like a predator, sizing up prey. "Well, darling, I think it's safe to say you're the most exciting thing to walk into this bar tonight." Argoz stiffened. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," Rose said, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "But trouble has a way of finding you, doesn't it?" Darren, who had been watching the exchange silently, stepped closer, his piercing gaze flicking between Rose and Argoz. "What's this about, Rose?" he asked, his tone edged with suspicion. "You know something I don't." Rose glanced at him, her smirk softening into something more calculated. "Let's just say our little friend here is of significant interest. I've already had the pleasure of getting acquainted with her." Darren raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "And you didn't think to mention this earlier?" Rose waved a hand dismissively. "It's not like I have to share all my secrets, dear." Feeling the weight of their attention, Argoz clutched the gem beneath her jacket, its warmth grounding her. "Look, I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice shaky but firm. I need to figure out what to do with it." Rose's expression shifted, a glimmer of genuine interest flashing in her eyes. "And that's where I come in, isn't it?" She gestured toward the bar. "You brought your shiny little secret into my territory. Lucky for you, I happen to know a thing or two about keeping things hidden. And alive." Argoz glanced at Darren, unsure. His sharp eyes softened slightly and he nodded. "Rose might have her quirks," he said, his tone wry. "But she's not wrong. This bar's probably the safest place for you right now." Rose leaned against the bar, twirling her empty glass between her fingers. "Safety, of course, isn't free," she said lightly, though her eyes were calculating. "There's always a price." Argoz's jaw tightened. "I don't have anything to give." Rose's smirk widened. "Oh, I'm not talking about gold, darling. I want something far more valuable. Your trust." "Trust," Argoz repeated, her tone skeptical. "Think of it as an alliance," Rose said, her voice smooth. "You're in over your head, and I'm offering you a lifeline. You help me keep this place running smoothly, and I'll make sure no one, Draven's lackeys or otherwise, lays a finger on you or your pretty little gem." Darren stepped closer, his expression darkening. "Rose," he said sharply, "don't push her." Rose straightened, her smirk never wavering. "Push her? Oh, Darren, I'm helping her. The poor thing's terrified and I'm giving her a chance to survive. What could be kinder than that?" Argoz looked between them, her instincts torn. She didn't trust Rose, not fully, but the offer was tempting, and she didn't have many options. Finally, Argoz took a deep breath, meeting Rose's gaze. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll help. Just don't make me regret it." Rose's smirk softened into something almost genuine. "Smart girl." She extended her hand, the diamond ring catching the light. Argoz hesitated before shaking it, her sharp yellow eyes wary. As the tension in the bar began to ease, Rose glanced at Darren, her playful smirk returning. "See? I'm not so bad." Darren huffed, running a hand through his hair. "Let's hope she doesn't regret it." The tension in the bar was just beginning to settle when the door swung open again. Caleb strode in, his jacket torn and a fresh bruise blooming on his cheek, with Evelyn close behind him. The witch's sharp eyes scanned the room before locking onto Argoz, her relief palpable. "Thank the stars," Evelyn muttered, her pace quickening as they approached the counter. Caleb, for his part, didn't bother with pleasantries. He planted himself in front of Argoz, looking her over. "You all right?" Caleb asked, his tone gruff but his concern obvious. Argoz nodded, the knot in her chest loosening slightly. "I should be asking you that. You're the one who stayed behind." "Gave him the slip," Caleb said, glancing toward the bar door as if expecting the captain to burst in at any moment. "Barely." Evelyn huffed, folding her arms. "And you didn't think to avoid getting punched in the face?" Caleb shot her a look. "It's not exactly my specialty, Ev." Darren, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. His sharp gaze flicked over Caleb and Evelyn, sizing them up. "Friends of yours?" he asked Argoz, his tone casual but his curiosity obvious. Argoz hesitated, glancing at Caleb and Evelyn for guidance. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly at Darren, his instincts clearly on high alert. "Yeah, we're her friends," Caleb said, his tone curt. "And you are?" "Darren," he said smoothly, extending a hand. Caleb didn't take it. Darren raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "Nice to meet you too." Before the conversation could continue, Rose stepped between them, her presence commanding. "All right, boys," she said, her tone light but firm. "Let's not start measuring who's got the bigger ego." Darren frowned at her, clearly not amused. "Rose, we're not done talking." Rose's smirk didn't waver. "Oh, but we are. For now." She turned toward him, her dark eyes glittering with amusement. "Go cool off, Darren. We'll finish our little chat later." Darren's jaw tightened, but after a long pause, he nodded. "Fine, but don't think I'm letting this go." "Wouldn't dream of it," Rose said sweetly, her tone dripping with sarcasm. With one last glance at Argoz, Darren turned and left the bar, the door swinging shut behind him. As soon as Darren was gone, Rose turned back to the group, her demeanour shifting from playful to serious. "All right," she said, leaning against the counter. "You've got my attention, and now my turf's been disrupted twice in one night. Start talking." Evelyn looked to Argoz, her brows furrowing. "What did you do?" "Why do you think I did something?" Argoz snapped, crossing her arms. "Because trouble doesn't just follow people around for no reason," Evelyn shot back. "What happened?" Argoz hesitated, glancing down at the gem beneath her jacket. Its faint glow seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "It's this," she said finally, pulling the gem out just enough for the group to see its light. Evelyn's eyes widened, and even Caleb stiffened slightly, his usual composure faltering. "That's what they're after?" Caleb asked, his tone low. Argoz nodded. "The captain. He wants it. And I don't think he's going to stop." Rose's expression didn't change, but the glint in her eyes sharpened. She reached for her glass, swirling its glowing contents idly. "So let me get this straight. You've got a shiny rock that's got half the underworld salivating, and you thought it would be a good idea to bring it here." Argoz bristled. "I didn't have a choice." "Clearly," Rose said, her tone dry. She took a sip of her drink before setting it down with a soft clink. "Lucky for you, I'm feeling generous tonight." "What's that supposed to mean?" Caleb asked, his tone cautious. "It means," Rose said, straightening, "that you're going to sit tight. Let me handle the fallout from this little incident. And in the meantime, I'll decide if you're worth the trouble you've caused." Evelyn frowned. And what's the price for your generosity? Rose's smirk returned. Oh, darling, we'll discuss that later. For now, consider yourselves under my protection. Enjoy it while it lasts. As Rose walked away, her confidence radiating with every step, Argoz slumped against the counter, her frustration bubbling over. Great, she muttered. Now I'm stuck owing favours to the Queen of Sarcasm. You're alive, Caleb said simply. That's what matters. For now, Evelyn added, her gaze drifting toward the door. But if that captain comes back with reinforcements, we need a plan. Caleb nodded. We can't stay here forever. We need to figure out what that thing is, and why it's so important. Argoz looked down at the gem, its glow reflecting in her sharp yellow eyes. Yeah, she said quietly. Me too. The Shadow Realm. Bar's energy had shifted after the earlier commotion. The tension was still thick, lingering like smoke after a fire. Argoz, Caleb and Evelyn huddled in one of the quieter corners of the grand hall, trying to make sense of their next steps. I still think we should leave, Caleb muttered, his sharp eyes scanning the room. This place is a powder keg. And go where? Evelyn shot back, her tone dry. Everywhere else is worse. Argoz was barely listening. Her gaze wandered to the trading tables across the hall, where patrons exchanged items that glimmered under the faint magical light. Her goblin instincts stirred at the sight of glittering jewels and polished metal. She tugged Caleb's sleeve. Look at that one, she said, pointing to a small black vial being handed over in exchange for a glowing orb. The vial's contents swirled like liquid shadow, faint wisps of dark energy leaking from its corked top. Caleb frowned. What the hell is that? Whatever it is, it's not good, Evelyn said, her voice low. Her hand hovered near her pouch of charms, ready for trouble. We should keep moving. But before they could, the deal went sour. The buyer, a wiry man with unnaturally bright eyes, grabbed the vial and took a step back, his movements jittery. This isn't enough, he hissed, his voice cracking with desperation. You said it would... The seller, a tall figure wrapped in a dark cloak, didn't respond. They simply turned to leave, but the man lunged, his aura flaring with chaotic energy. The vial shattered in his hand, releasing a dark mist that seemed to crawl along his skin. His scream cut through the hall, and suddenly his body convulsed, the mist merging with his aura in violent, jagged bursts. Argoz froze. The man's eyes locked onto her, wild and unfocused, and he lunged. Move, Caleb shouted, pulling her back just as the man's claws swiped through the air where she'd been standing. Evelyn stepped forward, her hands moving in precise motions as she muttered a spell. A faint blue barrier shimmered between them and the man, but it flickered under the weight of his erratic attacks. This isn't going to hold, Evelyn shouted. Caleb shoved Argoz behind him, his stance firm. What's wrong with him? It's the drug, Evelyn snapped, her voice tight. The same stuff that's been causing all the chaos here. It's corrupted his aura. Enough! Rose's sharp voice sliced through the commotion like a knife. The man froze mid-lunge, his wild eyes flicking toward her. She stepped forward, her expression calm but unyielding, every movement deliberate. Despite her lack of magic, the weight of her presence seemed to anchor the room. You've already made a mess, Rose said, her tone icy. Don't make it worse. The man hesitated, his aura flickering erratically. But before he could move again, Silas's enforcers emerged from the shadows, their massive forms cutting off any escape. They subdued him with practiced efficiency, their grip unrelenting. As the chaos settled, Rose turned to Argoz and her companions, her dark eyes narrowing. You lot seem to attract trouble wherever you go. Argoz bristled. We didn't do anything. He just... Relax, darling, Rose interrupted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I'm not blaming you. Yet. Evelyn stepped forward, her expression grim. That wasn't normal. The drug. It's worse than I thought. Rose's gaze flicked to the shattered vial on the ground, her smirk fading. You're not wrong. And if you're smart, you'll help me figure out where this filth is coming from. Caleb frowned. Why us? Rose's smirk returned, sharp and knowing. Because you're here, and because you've got something they want, she said, her eyes flicking briefly to the faint glow beneath Argoz's jacket. Call it mutual interest. Argoz slumped into one of the Shadow Realm bar's worn leather chairs, the faint hum of the gem beneath her jacket, the only thing keeping her grounded. The earlier chaos replayed in her mind, the man's wild, corrupted aura, the dark energy spilling out of the shattered vial, and the towering enforcers dragging him away. She curled her knees up to her chest, her sharp yellow eyes darting nervously around the room. Caleb leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed, his steady gaze fixed on her like a shield. Evelyn sat beside her, rubbing her temples as though trying to process the same weight Argoz felt. "You all right?" Caleb asked, his voice low and calm. Argoz shook her head. "No," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "What was that? What even was that?" Evelyn sighed, her tone sharp but not unkind. "It's called reality. Welcome to it." Argoz glared at Evelyn, her fists clenching. "I didn't ask for this," she snapped, her voice rising. "I didn't ask for any of it. The gem, the captain, the crazy guy who tried to kill me. None of this is my fault." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanour unshaken. "No, but it's yours now. That gem chose you, Argoz. Whether you like it or not, it's not going anywhere." Caleb shifted, his voice softening. "Ev, take it easy." But Argoz was already on her feet, pacing. I can't do this," she muttered, her hands tangling in her hair. "I just wanted to survive, maybe find some shiny stuff and keep my head down. And now I'm here, running from captains and whatever that was back there." She gestured vaguely toward the area where the corrupted man had been dragged away. She turned to Caleb, her voice cracking. "What am I supposed to do? What if they come after me again?" Caleb stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You've been through worse," he said firmly. "I've seen you in tighter spots and you've always found a way out. This is just another fight." Argoz blinked at him, her breathing slowing. His confidence felt like a lifeline, even if she didn't fully believe him. "You're not alone in this," Caleb added, his voice gentler now. "Evelyn and we've got your back, and you've got that shiny rock of yours whether you like it or not. So stop panicking and start thinking." "Well, isn't this touching?" Rose's voice sliced through the moment, dripping with sarcasm. She approached, her dark eyes gleaming with amusement as she twirled the empty glass in her hand. "The scrappy little goblin having a crisis. How very relatable." Argoz's shoulders stiffened. "What do you want?" Rose smirked, leaning against the back of a nearby chair. "Oh, nothing much. Just to remind you that your problems aren't entirely your own anymore. That little gem of yours has stirred up quite the fuss. And now, thanks to tonight's lovely performance, more people are going to notice." "Great," Argoz muttered, crossing her arms. "That's just what I need." "Which is why you're lucky to have me," Rose continued, ignoring her sarcasm. "Because whether you want to admit it or not, you need someone who understands how this world works. Someone who can keep you from ending up like our poor, unfortunate friend back there." "I didn't ask for your help," Argoz shot back, her sharp tone surprising even herself. Rose raised an eyebrow, her smirk unwavering. "No, but you're going to get it anyway. Consider it a gift or a favour. Either way, you're not exactly in a position to refuse." Argoz clenched her fists, her frustration boiling over. "Why? Why do you even care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." For the first time, Rose's playful demeanour faltered. Her gaze hardened, a flicker of something darker crossing her face. "Let's just say I don't like seeing my territory disrupted," she said evenly. "And that gem of yours? It's a magnet for trouble. If you're smart, you'll let me help you keep it and yourself alive." Evelyn stood, her voice cutting through the tension. "All right, enough. We all get it. This isn't ideal for anyone, but standing here arguing isn't going to solve anything." She turned to Argoz, her tone softening. "Look, you've been thrown into the deep end, but you're stronger than you think. You've survived this long, right? You can survive this too. Argoz hesitated, her gaze flicking between Evelyn and Caleb. Finally, she nodded, though her fists remained clenched. Fine, she muttered. But I don't have to like it. Evelyn smiled faintly. No one's asking you to. The group fell into an uneasy silence, the tension thick but no longer suffocating. Argoz sank back into her chair, her fingers brushing against the gem's faint glow beneath her jacket. She didn't trust Rose, not fully, but for now she didn't have much choice. Good, Rose said finally, her smirk returning. Now that we're all on the same page, let's figure out how to keep you alive long enough to make it worth my time. Argoz sighed, leaning her head back against the chair. Yeah, she muttered. Great plan. The group's discussion shifted as the earlier tension ebbed away. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers tapping rhythmically against her knee as she studied Argoz. The faint glow of the gem beneath Argoz's jacket drew her gaze like a moth to a flame. It's not just a fancy rock, Evelyn said thoughtfully, her eyes narrowing. The bond. It's something more. Something I haven't seen before. What do you mean? Argoz asked, hugging her knees to her chest. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Rose. I mean, the gem's not just attached to you, it's alive in some way. It's feeding off your energy, maybe even your emotions. Rose leaned against the bar, her dark eyes fixed on Argoz. Which explains why you're such a magnet for chaos, she said with a smirk. Congratulations, darling. You're officially interesting. Evelyn rolled her eyes at Rose but pressed on. If we're going to figure this out, we need somewhere secure. The gem's magic is subtle, but the wrong spell or the wrong people could trigger something dangerous. Rose straightened, brushing an invisible speck of dust off her sleeve. And where exactly are you staying now? Some 5-star hotel, I presume? Caleb coughed, avoiding her gaze. It's a warehouse. Rose froze, her smirk dropping into an expression of utter disbelief. A warehouse? She repeated as though the word physically hurt her. You're telling me you're keeping a priceless magical artifact and a goblin with an apparent death wish in a place that probably smells like motor oil and rats. It's not that bad, Caleb muttered defensively. Rose waved a hand, cutting him off. No, this won't do. You might as well hang a sign outside that says, "Please come rob us." Argoz bristled. We don't have many options, okay? Not everyone can live in a palace. Rose tilted her head, her smirk returning. True, but not everyone has me. Rose stepped closer, her presence commanding. I know a place, discreet, secure, and far more civilized than your current accommodations. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. What's the catch? Rose's smirk widened. Oh, darling, no catch. Just the satisfaction of knowing you'll stop making me cringe every time I think about your living situation. Uh-huh, Caleb said skeptically. And why would you care? Rose shrugged, leaning casually against the counter. Let's just say I have a vested interest in keeping the gem, and its scrappy little goblin alive. You can thank me later. Argoz frowned, glancing between her companions. I don't know. Evelyn sighed. She's not wrong, Argoz. The warehouse isn't exactly secure. If someone like Draven's captain finds you there... Fine, Argoz interrupted, throwing her hands up. But if this turns out to be some kind of trap, I'm stealing every shiny thing you own. Rose laughed, her voice melodic and sharp. I wouldn't expect anything less. Rose led them through the city's winding streets, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. The group followed cautiously, with Caleb glancing behind them every few steps. Finally, they arrived at an unassuming brownstone, its exterior weathered but charming. This is it? Argoz asked skeptically. Rose smirked. Don't let the outside fool you. The inside's what counts. She unlocked the door and led them inside, revealing a cozy but surprisingly modern interior. The space was clean with high ceilings, plush furniture, and a faint magical hum in the air. Protective wards shimmered faintly on the walls, barely visible but undeniably powerful. It's warded, Rose said, gesturing around the room. Nothing gets in or out without my permission. Evelyn wandered to one of the walls, her hand brushing against the runes. These wards are advanced, she murmured. Where did you get them? Rose smirked. A lady never tells.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.